This is The Magician's Nephew, Chapter 2, Digory and His Uncle. It was so sudden and so horribly unlike anything that had ever happened to Digory, even in a nightmare, that he let out a scream. Instantly, Uncle Andrew's hand was over his mouth. "None of that," he hissed in Digory's ear. "If you start making a noise, your mother will hear it, and you know what a fright might do to her." As Digory said afterward, the horrible meanness of getting at a chap in that way almost made him sick. But of course he didn't scream again. "That's better," said Uncle Andrew. "Perhaps you couldn't help it. It is a shock when you first see someone vanish. Why, it gave me a turn when the guinea pig did it the other night." "Is that when you yelled?" asked Digory. "Oh, you heard that, did you? I hope you haven't been spying on me." "No, I haven't," said Digory indignantly. "But what's happened to Polly?" "Congratulate me, dear boy," said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands. "My experiment has succeeded. The little girl's gone, vanished, right out of the world." "What have you done to her?" "Sent her to another place." "What do you mean?" asked Digory. Uncle Andrew sat down and said, "Well, I'll tell you about it. Have you ever heard of old Mrs. LaFay?" "Wasn't she the great aunt or something?" said Digory. "Not exactly," said Uncle Andrew. "She was my godmother. That's her there on the wall." Digory looked and saw a faded photograph. It showed the face of an old woman in a bonnet. And he could now remember that he had once seen a photo of the same face in an old drawer at home in the country. He had asked his mother who it was, and his mother had not seemed to want to talk about the subject much. It was not at all a nice face, Digory thought. Though, of course, with those early photographs, one could never really tell. Wasn't there something wrong about her, Uncle Andrew?" he asked. "Well," said Uncle Andrew with a chuckle, "it depends on what you call wrong. People are so narrow-minded. She certainly got very queer in later life. That means strange. She did very unwise things. That is why they shut her up." "In an asylum, do you mean?" "Oh, no," said Uncle Andrew in a shocked voice. "Nothing of that sort. Only in a prison." "I say," said Digory, "what had she done?" "Oh, poor woman," said Uncle Andrew. "She had been very unwise. There were a good many different things. We needn't go into all that. She was always very kind to me. But look here. What has all this got to do with Polly? I do wish you'd—" "All in good time, my boy, all in good time," said Uncle Andrew. They let old Mrs. LaFay out before she died, and I was one of the very few people whom she would allow to see her. She had got to dislike ordinary, ignorant people, you understand. I do myself, but she and I were interested in the same sort of things. It was only a few days before her death that she told me to go to an old bureau in her house and open a secret drawer and bring her a little box that I would find there. The moment I picked up that box, I could tell by the prickling of my fingers that I had something great and of a great secret in my hands. She gave it to me and made me promise that as soon as she was dead, I would burn it, unopened, with certain ceremonies that I promise I did not keep." "Well, then, that was jolly rotten of you," said Digory. "Rotten?" said Uncle Andrew with a puzzled look. "Oh, I see. You mean that little boys ought to keep their promises. Very true. Most right and proper, I'm sure. I'm very glad I have been taught to do it. But of course you must understand the rules of that sort." however excellent they may be for little boys and servants and women and even people in general, can't possibly be expected to apply to profound students and great thinkers and sages like myself. No, Digory, men like me who possess hidden wisdom are freed from common rules, just as we are cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny." As he said this, he sighed and looked so grave and noble and mysterious that for a second Digory really thought he was saying something rather fine. But then he remembered that ugly look he had seen on his uncle's face the moment before Polly had vanished, and all at once he saw through Uncle Andrew's grand words. All it means, he said to himself, is that he thinks he can do anything he likes to get what he wants. "Of course," said Uncle Andrew, "I didn't dare open the box for a long time, for I knew it might contain something highly dangerous. For my godmother was a very remarkable woman. The truth is, she was one of the last mortals in this country who had fairy blood in her. She said there had been 2 others in her time. One was a duchess, and the other was a chairwoman. In fact, Digory, you are now talking to the last man, possibly, who really had a fairy godmother. There! That'll be something for you to remember when you're an old man yourself." "I bet she was a bad fairy," thought Digory, and added out loud, "But what about Polly?" "How you do harp on that," said Uncle Andrew, "as if that was what mattered. My first task was, of course, to study the box itself. It was very ancient, and I knew enough even then to know that it wasn't Greek or Old Egyptian or Babylonian or Hittite or Chinese. It was older than any of those nations. Ah, that was a great day when at last I found out the truth. The box was Atlantean. It came from the lost island of Atlantis. That meant it was centuries older than any of the Stone Age things they dig up in Europe. And it wasn't a rough, crude thing like them either. For in every dawn of time, Atlantis was really a great city with palaces and temples and learned men." He paused for a moment, as if he expected Digory to say something, but Digory was disliking his uncle more and more every minute, so he said nothing. "Meanwhile," continued Uncle Andrew, "I was learning a good deal in other ways. It wouldn't be proper to explain them to a child, about magic in general. That meant that I came to have a fair idea of what sort of things might be in the box. By various tests, I narrowed down the possibilities. I had to get to know some devilishly strange people and go through some very disagreeable experiences. That was what turned my head gray. One doesn't become a magician for nothing. My health broke down in the end, but I got better. And at last I actually knew." Although there was not really the last chance of anyone overhearing them, he leaned forward and almost whispered when he said, "The Atlantean box contained something that had been brought from another world when our world was only just beginning." "What?" asked Digory, who was now interested in spite of himself. "Only dust," said Uncle Andrew. "Fine, dry dust. Nothing much to look at, nothing much to show for a lifetime of toil, you might say. But when I looked at that dust, I took jolly good care not to touch it, and thought that every grain had once been in another world. I don't mean another planet, you know. They're a part of our world, and you could get to them if you went far enough. But a really other world, other nature, another universe. Somewhere you would never reach even if you've traveled through space of this universe forever and ever. A world that could be reached by only magic. Well, here Uncle Andrew rubbed his hands in his knuckles and cracked like fireworks. I knew, he went on, that if only you could get to the right form, that dust would draw you back to the place it had come from. But the difficulty was to get it into the right form. My early experiments were failures. I tried them on guinea pigs. Some of them only died. Some exploded like little bombs. Well, that was a cruel thing to do, said Digory, who had once had a guinea pig of his own. How you keep getting off the point, said Uncle Andrew. That's what the creatures were for. I bought them myself. Let me see, where was I? Yes. At last I succeeded making the rings, the yellow rings. But a new difficulty arose. I was pretty sure now that the yellow ring would send any creature that it touched into the other place. But what would be the good of that if I couldn't get them to come back and tell me what they had found there? And what about them? Said Digory. A nice mess they'd be in if they couldn't get back. You will keep on looking at everything from the wrong point of view, said Uncle Andrew, with a mere look of impatience. Can't you understand that the thing is a great experiment? The whole point is sending anyone into the other place. It is that I want to find out what it's like. Well, why didn't you go yourself then? Digory had hardly ever seen anyone look so surprised and offended as his uncle did with that simple question. Me? Me? He exclaimed. The boy must be mad at my time of life and in the state of health, to risk shock and the dangers of being flung suddenly to a different universe. I never heard of anything so preposterous in all my life. Do you realize what you're saying? Think what another world means. You might meet anything. Anything! And I supposed you've sent Polly into it then, said Digory. His cheeks were flaming with anger now. And all I can say is, he added, if you are my uncle, is that you've behaved like a coward. A coward! Sending a girl to a place you're afraid to go yourself. Silence, sir, said Uncle Andrew, bringing his hand down on the table. I will not be talked to like a little dirty schoolboy. You don't understand. I'm the great scholar, the magician, the adept, who is doing the experiment. Of course I need subjects to do it on. Bless my soul, you'll be telling me next that I ought to have asked the guinea pigs permission before I use them. No great wisdom can be reached without sacrifice. But the idea of my going myself is ridiculous. It's like asking a general to fight as a common soldier. Suppose I got killed. What would become of my life's work? Oh, stop jawing, said Digory. Are you going to bring Polly back? I was going to tell you when you rudely interrupted me, said Uncle Andrew, that I did at last find out the way of doing the return journey. The green rings draw you back. But Polly hasn't got a green ring. No, said Uncle Andrew with a cruel smile. Then she can't get back, shouted Digory. And it's exactly the same if you'd murdered her. She can get back, said Uncle Andrew. If someone else will go after her, wearing the yellow ring himself, and take 2 green rings, one to bring himself back and one to bring her back. And now, of course, Digory saw the trap in which he was caught. He stared at Uncle Andrew, saying nothing, his mouth wide open. His cheeks had gone pale. I hope, said Uncle Andrew, presently in a very high and mighty voice, just as if he were the perfect uncle who had given one handsome tip and some good advice. I hope, Digory, you were not given to showing the white feather. I should be very sorry to think that if any one of our family had not enough honor and chivalry to go aid of a lady in distress. Oh, shut up, said Digory. If you had any honor at all, you'd be going yourself. But I know you won't. All right, I see I've got to go. but you are a beast. I suppose you planned the whole thing so that she'd go without knowing it, and then I'd have to go after her. Of course, said Uncle Andrew with his hateful smile. Very well, I'll go, but there's one thing I jolly well mean to say first. I didn't believe in magic until today. I see now it's real. Well, if it is, I suppose all the old fairy tales are more or less true, and you're simply a wicked, cruel magician, like the ones in the stories. Well, I've never read a story in which people of that sort weren't paid out in the end, and I bet you will be, and serve you right. Of all of the things Digory had said, this was the first that really went home. Uncle Andrew started, and there came over his face a look of such horror. Beast though he was, you could almost feel sorry for him. But a second later, he soothed it all away with a rather forced laugh. Well, I suppose that is a natural thing for a child to think, brought up among women, as you have been. Old wives' tales, huh? I don't think you need to worry about my danger, Digory. Wouldn't it be better to worry about the danger of your little friend? She's been gone some time, and if there are any dangers over there, well, it would be a pity to arrive a moment too late. A lot you care, said Digory fiercely, but I'm sick of this jaw. What have I got to do? You really must learn to control that temper of yours, my boy, said Uncle Andrew coolly. Otherwise you'll grow up to be just like your Aunt Letty. Now, attend to me. He got up, put on a pair of gloves, and walked over to the tray that contained the rings. They only work, he said, if they're actually touching your skin. Wearing gloves, I can pick them up. Like this, nothing happens. If you carried one in your pocket, nothing would happen. But of course, you'd have to be careful to put your hand in your pocket and touch it by accident. The moment you touch the yellow ring, you vanish out of this world. Then you are in the other place, I expect. Of course, this hasn't been tested yet, but I expect that the moment you touch the green ring, you vanish out of that world. I expect and reappear in this. Now, take these 2 greens and drop them into your right hand pocket. Remember very carefully which pocket they are in. G for green, R for right, G-R, you see, which are the first 2 letters of green. One for you, one for the little girl. Now, pick up the yellow one for yourself. I should put it on your finger if I were you. There will be less chance of dropping it. Digory had almost picked up Yellow Ring when suddenly checked himself. Look here, he said. What about Mother? Supposing she asks where I am? The sooner you go, the sooner you'll be back, said Uncle Andrew cheerfully. But you don't really know whether I can get back. Uncle Andrew shrugged his shoulders and walked to the door, unlocked it, threw it open and said, very well. Just as you please. Go down and have your dinner. Leave the little girl to be eaten by wild animals or drowned or starved or in the other world and lost there for good. If that's what you prefer, it's all one to me. Perhaps before tea time you'd better drop in on Mrs. Plummer and explain that she'll never see your daughter again because you were afraid to put on the ring. By gum, said Digory, don't I wish I was big enough to punch your head. Then he buttoned up his coat, took a deep breath, picked up the ring, and he thought then, as he always thought afterward too, he could not decently have done anything else. That is the end of chapter 2. See you in chapter 3.